start. So as I said, morning, afternoon, evening. This is an early session for us, London time. As I shared yesterday, relative to last year's event, we've taken a different approach around having these events over the 4 days at different times, because we wanted to recognize that our members and persons who are interested may be calling in from different time zones. So we'll be interested in your feedback on that. Let us know in the chat where you're calling us from and whether you have attended any of the sessions earlier this week. If not, the recordings are available and I highly recommend them. We had some really insightful conversations over the last 2 days. I'm personally looking forward to this panel discussion on the global recognition of ISO 45003. As a reminder, my name is Melissa Mark Joyce, and I will be the facilitator of this panel discussion. So many of us may have heard of ISO 45003, especially over the last couple of years. So it's great that we have 3 panelists today to help demystify it and provide advice on how we can support organizations in addressing psychosocial risk. These 3 persons who will be on the panel are very active on LinkedIn, very active in this space. And in some cases, they have podcasts that I'm sure if you're not following, I highly recommend. So they don't need much introduction, but I would like to say a bit about them before we get into the discussion. First up, we have Joelle Mitchell, who's actually calling in from Australia, one of my favorite places. So Joelle is an organizational psychologist and human factors specialist, currently working with People Diagnostics as their global health of psychological health and safety. She takes academic research findings from the fields of psychology, OHS, and human factors, and translates them into the language and tools used in the field of risk management. She applies the principles of evidence-based practice to drive improvement in psychological health and safety outcomes. She's a regular speaker at industry events and co-host of the Psych Health and Safety podcast. Louise Hosking, who is the director and owner of Hoskins Associates, co-founder of OneWISH, and current IOSH president. Louise is well known as an IOSH-approved training provider and risk management specialist, bringing with her over 29 years of experience within a variety of blue chip and public sector organizations. Her aim is to help organizations create healthy, happy, and safe workplaces that enjoy all the benefits of operating in a sustainable and environmentally friendly manner. And as co-founder of OneWISH, Louise is the brainchild for why we're having today's and this week's event. Welcome, Louise. Last but not least is Peter Kelly. Peter spent 24 years working with the UK Health and Safety Executive as a psychologist and more recently the head of programs for the Mates in Mind. Peter is a well-known technical expert on mental health and well-being and prevention of work-related stress, and has been an advisor on several European projects on psychosocial interventions. Peter was actually recently profiled on the British Safety Council website, the link of which I'll put in the chat. And Peter can also be heard on the UK Psych Health and Safety podcast. So we have 2 people who have podcasts. So Louise, when are you starting your podcast series? When are you coming the next Meghan Markle?
Well, I have to say, Flourish DX are very good to me, and I do enjoy the chat with them. So I think I do have the award as being on there for more than once. So
I've listened to the UK one, the UK and Australia one, and I know for their 100 episode, Joelle, they did have some they did highlight people who have come back at least more than once. So you may have some competition there.
we know each other very well, so I think it's going to be an interesting conversation.
Yes, and so I want to say thanks, Joelle, Louise, and Peter, for giving up your time for this session today. So as I said, for those who are watching or listening in, post your questions in the chat box. I do have some questions for the panel, but I'm also interested in any questions that those listening in would like to ask. So we'll bring those in as we go through. So I smiled when I was using the terms psychological safety, psychosocial hazards, etc. So I want to kick off actually with a question around, we've been seeing the terms, some of us are using the terms psychological safety, psychosocial hazards, risk, etc. So what is the difference in those terminologies, concepts, if there is one? So maybe I can ask Joelle to kick off on that.
Yes. Hi, thank you. Lovely to be here from Perth, Western Australia. And thank you very much for inviting me on today, Melissa. Yeah, as far as your question goes, there is a lot of what we call concept confusion out there. So psychological safety, a lot of the time is used sort of interchangeably with psychological health and safety, psychosocial risk management. These sort of terms do tend to get lumped in together, but they are quite distinct. So psychological safety is really a team-based construct, and it's sort of about how safe you feel to raise concerns, to express your opinion, to suggest new ways of doing things, being yourself at work, those types of things. So being able to do that without fear of negative repercussion or consequence, and particularly in relation to raising things like physical safety concerns, needing to stop the job for safety reasons, those types of things. That concept of psychological safety becomes quite important. When we're talking about psychological health and safety, this is really about companies establishing systems of work that are protective of employee mental health, that promote positive mental health, actively identify hazards and put controls in place to reduce risk, and then also respond to ill health in a proactive and evidence-informed way. And then psychosocial risk management is a component of that broader approach to psychological health and safety, which is really focused on identifying the psychosocial hazards, understanding them, putting controls in place, and then monitoring the effectiveness of those controls over time.
No, thanks so much, Joelle, for that. Yeah, as you know, we've been seeing the terms a lot, so it's good to get that explanation as we kick off. Peter, is there anything you wanted to add on that question?
Oh no, Joelle's just done a masterclass in definitions. I mean, effectively, the language here is a really important thing. It's we have to find a way of simplifying our obviously well thought out theoretical construct in a way that makes it relevant to people. So it's what happens to you at work and how it influences your head effectively that we should be thinking about, and this is what we it is what they're doing at work. Is it leading to you going home feeling, actually, I don't want to go back to work the next day? And if that is the case, then, that's when your psychosocial elements of work are impacting you. That's really important.
No, great. Thanks for that.
So nothing to add, just sit at the feet of the oracle.
Good. No, thank you. So good. I'll move to my second question. So, as I said in the introduction, and again, we see a lot of articles, podcasts, etc., around, these aspects, mental health and well-being, especially post-pandemic. I'm interested in what's happening from a regulatory perspective in places like Australia and the UK, and maybe a global perspective. So maybe Joelle and Peter and then Louise, can you share a bit of what's happening from a regulatory perspective and why we're seeing an increase from a regulatory perspective? What's the business case for all of this? So Joelle?
Yeah, sure. So there's been quite a bit happening in the regulatory space in Australia, and it kicked off with the Boland Review a few years ago, which basically did a review of our legislation and sort of the outcomes, and concluded that we needed some changes to our health and safety legislation in Australia to bring psychological health and safety up to the same level and the same level of importance as physical health and safety. And so what we've seen then over time is sort of a progressive approach from regulators and legislators to inform organisations about their duties. So their duties really have always been there, as is with the legislation in the UK, but the approach has been to be more explicit about how to approach psychological health and safety. And so most recently in Australia, we've seen our model work health and safety regulations have been updated to include a section specifically looking at psychosocial or psychological health and safety, psychosocial risk management. So giving more instruction to organisations in how they should be approaching this to be able to demonstrate that they're meeting their duties under the Act. So the model regulations have been updated, and New South Wales has been the first state in Australia to adopt the changes to those regulations. Queensland has announced that they will be doing so in, I believe, April of next year. And then Victoria, that has its own set of legislation, have also released a draft set of regulations that sort of say similar things about psych health and safety duties. And the expectation is that all of the states and territories will be likely to have adopted some version of those regulations by the middle of next year.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I've seen a lot of communication saying Australia is leading in this space. I think also with Canada. But Peter, maybe a UK perspective, and then Louise, love to hear your views on this.
Yeah, I mean, within the UK, there's always been a statutory duty to assess risks of, stress-inducing situations. So, anything in work that has potential to cause work-related stress is covered under the Health and Safety at Work as at Reg 3, requiring you to do a risk assessment, Reg 5 requiring you to do something about what you've found. I guess the difference that we find now is when the management standards, which is the UK approach, was launched, we didn't have a management system for psychological health and safety. So what in ISO 45003, which we'll come to later, what we now have is a system we can monitor and measure against to see if we're looking for an organisation to see if they're mature in what they're doing and how they're managing work-related stress, rather than just simply doing a risk assessment. We want to see what processes you've got in place. So, and that's facilitated that. The European Union is minded, I'm told, that to move towards a directive on psychosocial risk. So that, in terms of, psychological health and safety. And if that happens, then that will be a fundamental game changer, I think, across Europe. And yeah, you're right. And I mean, the Canadians have the Canadian standards, which are really good. Then you kind of looked at them from a UK perspective. God, I wish we could do that. But they were sort of ahead of the game. And then America has total worker health. So we've got a flurry of activity across the globe on it, and we're all pretty much going in the same sort of direction, which is nice. And then so I would say the regulatory is there. There's a clear sphere where you can actually go in and use regulation. But what we wanted, and I guess what we've now got, is a psych health and safety management system, which is what 45,003.
No, great, thanks. So Louise, maybe you can touch on the business case for this. So, regulatory is the baseline. So it's good to see regulations coming, but yeah, it'd be great to hear your views around the broader beyond regulatory basis.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I mean, these guys have really touched on, certainly what I'm seeing around the world as well. And yeah, I think the challenge around business is, I remember sort of going to Ireland, gosh, 3 or 4 years ago now, and an ex-colleague of that Peter knows, a psychologist over there, said to me, the thing about this, it's like managing jelly. And I think business has been really confused in respect of how it implements this stuff. So, I run a business, off the back of the pandemic. We know that, this matters more. It's gone up the priority scale. If businesses are looking at across the board at their health and safety, this, we've always known that this exists and something that needs to be managed, but it's a higher priority than it's ever been before. And I think business has been confused on what to do. And in exactly the same way as Peter has said, you know, if you think about what happens in the UK, you know, the HSE are very good at creating guides and code of practice and so on, but we just haven't had that. And I do think there's still confusion in respect of organisations and businesses. It's a really difficult area. They see it as a difficult area to get a hold of, and I think it's putting business off of actually saying, right, we need to deal with this, which comes back to us as a profession. And I think as a profession, we're really good at identifying hazards and managing risk and bringing together people within organisations to do all of those things. So 45,003 kind of puts the meat on the bones and is a really good guide that will help businesses to do that. And I think they've just got to not be afraid and step in.
No, great. So thanks for those perspectives, and it ties in well to my next question around, you know, ISO 45003. Again, one of the buzzwords in the last year or two, but would be great to understand a bit more about it. And, you know, how did it come about? What's happening globally about its implementation, and what has been the uptake across the globe? So, Peter, I believe you had something to do with its launch or development, I should say. So maybe I'll ask you to kick off and give us more details around what is ISO 45003.
I love the word kick off. Yeah, I mean, basically, being the full geek that I am, I have the standard in front of me, and in essence, ISO 45003 came about because there was an original standard 45001, which was looking at a safety management system, and everyone, well, what about psychological health? And it wasn't included in the original standard. So that was 45,001. 45,003 was a consequence of it not being there, but it was also, I think, a seminal moment for it, because we've all been tinkering away in our little domains in the world on looking at psychological health and safety, and we hadn't really brought it all together. And effectively, that's what the 45,003 does. You can see it there. It's nice. It's red, and what it attempts to do is to align the practices of what countries are doing on psychological health and safety. It was 3 years in development, many arguments and disagreement, and even when we've done it, not everyone was happy, were they, Joelle? You're like, I can't believe you did that. But that's the joy of being on a committee. You have to sort of negotiate certain things. But no, it sets out a management system for you, and it does that in a very effective way. It is now only 38 pages long. The original one was 90. In fact, it's 26 pages. So the point being is it's readable. It takes you through the system, and it is there as a consequence of 74 countries coming together, and which have representation and agreeing to this as a standard, and has been in one South American country adopted as part of their national regulations. And it does give you, do you want me to go quickly through what the elements of it are, or should we talk about that later?
Yeah, no, go ahead and just highlight high level what the elements are, the framework.
Okay, so and essentially it sets out to give you the scope of it and the terms, and we've just had a very good example of terms and definitions of what we mean in this realm. So the first thing you need to understand the context of the organisation. Where are they in their maturity around mental health issues? The role of leadership and worker participation. How strategically important leadership being committed to this in a real way. Then there's the planning, how to address the risks that are there, and we take you through those processes. What support needs to be in place, and then the operational planning and control as well. And it is, if you are familiar with the can-do act, it's a can-do act principle that you're doing, and then you do a performance evaluation and improvement. And if you go online, you'll find a very nice graphic that explains all of that in a really good way. And if you are like me, you'll go to look at the 1 hour training. Even though I helped devise it, I went to the 1 hour training that Flourish DX do, which is a great introduction to take you through it, and to simplify the message. Obviously developed by Joelle and then fronted by Jason. So but the true knowledge sits right in front of us. So yeah, it's but I thoroughly recommend, if you're not familiar, do the hour training, and then come back and talk to us, because we are almost like on a mission here to change the world of work. Well, not almost, we are on a mission to change the world of work, that people can go home healthy, not go home mentally ill because of the context of their work. So
yeah,
and that's what it does.
Excellent. Thanks, Peter, for that overview. So Joelle, would like to hear a bit more from yourself, and Peter touched on a program you all are leading.
Yeah, so part of what we do, in addition to our technology platform, is that we do provide a lot of free resources. E-learning, the podcast, is another example, because we recognise that it is a learning journey for most organisations to understand these concepts and get to a point where they can see why they need to do it, what they need to do, how to go about it. And so we do develop a lot of these resources. So the 45,003 training, as Peter said, it is a 1 hour course. I'll pop the link in the comments here, but it's 45,003.org, so it's nice and easy to remember. We've got a few different courses available in there, but yeah, I think it's called Foundations, 45,003 Foundations. It goes through each of the content clauses, really sort of describes it in probably less standardese, so more layman's terms, and we sort of talk about examples of how you might go about implementing that, approaches that you could take. So it makes it a little bit more practical than just a set of requirements. Yeah, and so we've had a really big uptake in that particular course.
No, excellent, thank you. And I love that it's being made free, and we're sharing it on our platform here. That's really amazing. Louise, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was actually going to add that I think that Peter was instrumental in working with BSI to actually make the standard available to SMEs as well. So if anybody sort of knows and understands how implementation of ISOs works, is organisations are responsible for holding and owning their own copy of the standard, and Peter was part of the team that made sure that this standard is going to be accessible to everybody. So we need to give Peter a big round of applause for that. So and I have to say, my team, my internal team, has gone through the training that Flourish DX provide, completely complimentary, and we've found it really useful and really helpful, and the podcast and everything else have really backed that up as a valuable resource that's literally going around. And what I really love about this is that we've come out of the pandemic, we've realized that this is massively important, and we're working together as a global community in a way that I've never seen before, which is incredible. Yes. I feel like I have conversations with Joelle and P interspersed as if we're kind of around the corner. So it's one of those really positive pieces. One of the things that I would say is that and again, these are personal perspectives from working with a wide range of organisations. Organisations don't have to have 45,001 to implement this standard. I loved what Pete said about the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. So if people are adopting the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, which I certainly work with much smaller organizations to even get them, you know, that's where we start. That's how we kind of develop this. And there's no reason why smaller organizations can't start to implement this. And the guide that I always give is, when you're bringing something in that's new, is build it up from foundation pieces first. So don't try and be perfect in terms of everything. Don't try and boil the ocean. It's look at the foundation pieces that you need to undertake first. So, you know, do the planning piece, you know, identify what your issues are. I think Joel's going to talk about the tools that they've got that can help in respect of that, and kind of build it up gradually. But the standard is very clear and, you know, readable. So it doesn't matter which kind of organization you work with, it will help.
Yeah, you've covered one of the questions that I have coming, but so I'll come to that. But
Sorry.
No, that's okay. But
can I just say, it is possible to spend 7 hours talking about the word risk. So and just consider, when you're developing a standard, that actually you know, the consensus is at the heart of it. But it literally was 7 hours in a hot room talking about risk, and the only risk I was I was going to get dehydrated. But there you go.
No, thanks, Peter. Peter mentioned it. You said there's been a country that has taken it as a regulatory requirement to implement. So I didn't capture the name of the location. If you can clarify that, and then
they're just in the process of doing it. So, but it is in South America.
Oh, South America, right? Yeah.
So, but they took it as the basis on which they you know, changing their legislation. I mean, ultimately, I think I wouldn't be surprised if once you know, once we start addressing this, if other countries do look at it and go, well, do you know what, actually the principles in the standard could be useful. But I think the thing to remember is that this is a voluntary standard. So it's not under law, you're not required. Whereas actually there are standards which are defined, which are law, and they're agreed in principle that's what you're expecting to people to do. So it's currently voluntary, I guess that's why.
No, understand. So are there any other examples of implementation, like organizations, or do we know what's been the uptake so far?
Well, we've got examples in the UK, MCOR and Serco, which have both you know, successfully implemented it. I'm hearing from people, you know, through contacts and that some people are starting to use it in SMEs, which is good, because the language was specifically developed to support SMEs as well. And so there is uptake is dependent on which country you're in, obviously, and how embedded they are in the standards process. I'm told from the British Standards Institute that it's going well. Not quite sure what that means, but going well probably is a good thing. But I think it's testament to the fact that you know, when you listen to the podcasts, we routinely get you know several thousand people listening to the podcast. There is a hunger, isn't there, Joelle, for knowledge and information, and it's fascinating when you are interviewing these people, and you can see their passion, but you can also see, actually, wow, you know, we're doing, some people are doing some amazing stuff, and this is because the psychological health and safety domain has brought that to, you know, brought it out. The fracture lines due to the pandemic are huge. The world of work has changed, how we work has changed, and the way going forward will change as well. And even you know, in my own sector, in the construction sector, you know, that's also changed, you know, in terms of, we have people that were working through the pandemic, but also working at a distance from each other. So there's implementate, you know, and now you've got people that will we work from home, don't go into an office, don't socialize. So it's whole things that come along.
Yeah, no, excellent. Just a reminder for those who are listening and via the various platforms, if you have a question you'd like to pose to the panel, do put it in the chat. I'd love to bring in some other questions, though I have a few here. So I want to explore a bit further around the implementation, and I'll ask Joelle to kick off on this one. So many of us aren't psychologists or mental health experts like Joelle or Peter and Louise. So what's the role of health and safety professionals when it comes to ISO 45003? And I know I asked this question in our session on Monday as well. So curious to hear from Joelle, and then Peter, and then Louise.
So I think that the role of the safety professional in psych health and safety is really the same as the role of the safety professional in physical health and safety. If you own a fleet of vehicles, delivery trucks, something like that, maintenance and repairs are an important aspect of keeping the driver of the vehicle safe, members of the public safe, other road users, etc. Your safety advisor isn't going to go down and do the service on the truck. Typically, they're not going to change the tires when they need changing. They're not going to do the oil change or any of that sort of thing. They're going to oversee the systems of work that make sure that inspections are done when they're supposed to be done, that quality assurance happens when it needs to happen, that repairs happen when they need to happen. But it's not the safety advisor who actually goes and physically does that work. And so it's the same for psych health and safety. I think that the role of the safety function in an organisation is to ensure that there are systems of work that prompt the hazard identification risk assessment process, and then they're potentially facilitating the generation of actions, and then those actions are assigned to the appropriate functions within an organisation. So, and in the case of psych health and safety, a lot of the time that's probably going to sit within HR, probably within injury management as well, and potentially with your organisation development team, and certainly with your leadership from the exec right through. So those are really the people who are going to have ownership of actions as a result of your risk assessment. But the health and safety team are really just about making sure that that process of hazard identification, risk assessment, monitoring, and action planning happens when it needs to happen.
Thanks, Joelle. Anything further, Peter or Louise?
I mean, I think really, it's putting the bones back on, the meat and bones into keeping people safe at work. For far too long, we've just considered safety in a physical construct, a physical element. We've not actually thought, people's psychological state is a determining factor in how they respond to safety incidents or that are happening around them. One of the things that we train all of our inspectors in when I was at HSC was in what we call performance influencing factors in an accident. Why did the accident occur? What led to that accident occurring? What was it? And very often you have to give consideration to these psychological factors. And I think that and it's always made logical sense that we can think about what people are thinking before they have the accident, because sometimes people think and then they have the accident, and you want to understand what was sort of going on there. But then the issue of the moment is mental illness in the context of work. We have a global pandemic of work-related stress, and it is not getting better. And actually, so doing something, doing the stuff that Joelle has been talking about, and addressing it is really, really important. So I kind of answered that question.
No, thanks. Louise?
Yeah, no, I think this is a great question. What is the role of the health and safety professional in this? But I will go back to basics and say, we are in the business of creating healthy, safe workplaces. And if anybody on the call didn't catch Rosa's talk that she did yesterday, which is on the OneWISH platforms currently, she talked about the effect that this has, you know, when people are in a work environment where they're feeling psychologically damaged, and when their mental health is being affected by work. She played a really fantastic clip that talked about the same receptors in the brain being affected as if they were being affected by physical safety issues as well. And the clip that she played, I don't know if you guys have heard this, actually went on to say if you take a paracetamol, it actually eases the pain, which I'd never heard before. It was just incredible. And so it's our job within the organizations that we work within, or within our spheres of influence, and those of us on this call have a huge sphere of influence around the world, is to put the health back into health and safety. And so if we're saying that this damages people's health, it is of course our role we have a role to play in all of that. But the modern health and safety professional is a leader and a facilitator, exactly as Joelle has said. And I loved that analogy that Joelle gave, is that, you know, if we're responsible for factories and equipment, we don't know the detail of every single piece of equipment. We're there to be health and safety leaders, and we should also be in the boardroom as well. And this starts from, you know, the board need to own this as an issue, because if they don't own this as an issue, it's not going to be prioritized. And that's a really difficult conversation for some boardrooms to have, because they may have adopted leadership styles which have got them to their positions that are counterproductive to actually implementing this fully within our organizations. And now I've set Pete off.
Yeah, see, Pete's come back. So I had wanted to say, I was going to say something about, I like what Joelle said about the role of leaders. And I like that you're saying the board. And I do have a question I want to tie back to that.
There's a difference between being a leader and being a manager.
Yeah.
Which comes back to a bigger health and safety debate, but I'm going to let Pete speak.
So Peter has something he wants to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Louise. Yeah, let's get this right, okay? For the last 50 years, our focus has been on physical, and we've not looked at this bit, the heart. Yeah. So what we need to be considering is putting the heart back into health and safety. But more than that, we need to be putting our focus back on health. And traditionally, we default to safety, and we don't realize that health and safety are interconnected. So these people who say, well, I'm a safety rep, that is inclusive of the fact that you need to do both the physical and also how is that person feeling. You know, does the way we work cause people to be ill? You know, if you've got 20 people on your team and 5 of them are off with depression or anxiety due to work-related stress, you have a problem, and it's a safety issue as well. You know what I mean, isn't it? You know, so
yeah. No, thanks. So it ties into a question, but you just said something that I'm going to challenge a bit, and challenge may be the wrong word, but you said put the heart back into health and safety, but was it there? Because, you know, as you said, you know, for the last 50 years, it has been around the safety. So is it putting it back in or putting it in? So just to challenge that terminology.
I was the one who set this all up anyway.
Right.
It's putting it in if it hasn't been in before.
Well, you know, if you look at if you chart health and safety, when people were first starting out in the 70s, 60s and 70s, were in the 50s, were a nightmare era. But in the 60s and 70s, we started looking at physical health issues.
Because we had incidents. So the incidents, right?
So being one of those, and we started to address that. So actually, we were then looking at some of the health issues. There was a movement in the 80s, if you remember, for some of us who remember because I'm old enough, but there was a movement in the 80s to looking at putting the psychological element into health and safety. So yeah, so there has been points where we've gone and then everyone's going, oh, not sure, let's go, because we default to the easiest thing, don't we? That's why we make people resilient and mindful.
Can I just add to this, because this has been a real theme for me, putting the heart into health and safety this in the last year, is that Pete's absolutely right, is as health and safety professionals, we don't create the trends or the priorities. That's very much business driven, and this has all been driven by the pandemic. But I think that historically, when we talk about health and safety, and I think the UK is a real victim of this, is that you start talking about health and safety and people's eyes kind of glaze over, and people think of physical safety and rules and compliance, whereas putting heart into this is about saying, do you know what, there's just more to this. It's about how people feel. So if people feel unsafe at work, that's a psychological issue in respect of that organisation. If they don't feel safe, if they don't feel that they can raise issues, and when they raise issues, there's nowhere for them to go, they're not going to raise issues for themselves, they're not going to raise issues for the person next to them, and there's not going to be that trust within the organisation. And without trust, we can have the best risk assessments and rules and safety management systems on the planet, but people are not going to follow those safety rules and systems. And so this is part of evolving our profession, if you like, to bring that care and the compassion that Peter always talks about into what we do, because we're talking about people, not pure process. So we have to have process, we have to have systems, but actually sometimes I think we forget about the people, and that's where putting the heart into health and safety comes from.
No, great, thanks. Karen has asked a question here, and I'll come to her question because it ties into one of the other questions I have. So the question, what I want to follow up on was, we hear all of what you're saying. I might be sitting in an organization where we think we have it right. So how do we know if we do or not? What are some of maybe the red flags at an organization or employee level that will say this is something we need to explore? You all touched on a few elements, so love to hear from Joelle on that piece first, and then go to Peter.
Yeah, I think it's probably going to be different for every organization, and there are lots of broader factors that are going to influence that. But I think some big ones for me will be things like your turnover rate. If you've got high turnover, that's an indicator that you maybe haven't got things right. If you're having lots of absenteeism, if you're having sort of low productivity issues, those types of things, those are all really good indicators without actually having to, I guess, go in and measure specifically, the mental health of your organisation. You can also look at people's behaviours. How are people actually acting? Are we seeing evidence of stress in people's behaviour? You can look at even things like your incident reporting and your investigation reports. You can look at grievances, exit interview data. There's also, organizations just collect lots and lots and lots of data. And, a lot of that is around people management, outcomes associated with the work that people are doing. And so looking at combinations of those different data sources will give you a good indication of how you're going. And then you can also look at, sort of mapping the the strategies and systems and things that you have in place against something like the integrated model, Tony Lamontaña's integrated model, and actually looking at, do we have all of our bases covered here, or, you know, have we got some gaps that we need to think about?
Thanks, Joelle. Peter, Louise, anything else to add? How do I know if I need to look into this?
You get insight from spending time with the people that you employ and actually listening to them. You know, in my experience, people come to you with solutions that are not costly, they're cost effective because they know what needs to be done to improve their workplaces. But actually you can go into a workplace and you can very quickly see the disenfranchised or the people that aren't happy, and you know, and because it's apparent from their workload, from their commitment, from a variety of factors that Joelle's talked about, that you might have a problem. The issue being is, if you have a problem in one, you can absorb that, and you can do individual things to improve that person's lot of their experience. If you have that in a collection of people, then you've got a systemic issue, and that's the knockover period. Is what's happening systemic? Is it happening more than one place? Where's it happening? Why is it happening? Are there a lot of people throwing computers out of windows on the same floor? Yeah, I use that as an extreme analogy, but you know, you can actually, it's very easy, we're even now doing staff surveys. You can identify where you potentially have a problem. The other thing about a staff survey or a well-being survey that you do, it's a pretty good indicator, isn't it? Because if you're in a company that's got 100% well-being, and you know, and satisfaction, great probabilities you haven't. So you can use that as well, you know, to measure yourself against. And I have used those when I've gone in and from an inspection capacity and said, well, what did your well-being survey say? Oh, right. And were you 100%? Everyone was 100% happy? No. Where were they not happy? And then we've looked at and seen what actions you've taken. So, yeah. You know, there are red flags, there are green flags, but they're you know, they're orange flags. Any flag color you want, but they're flags and they're pretty obvious some of the times.
Louise, before you come in, I just want to expand, and maybe you can touch on this then. So, you know, in the last 2 years, there's been quiet quitting. There's been people have been leaving. Part of it has been everyone's been reflecting. You know, COVID period has allowed us to really think about, you know, what do we want to do, where do we want to work, etc. So Joelle and both Peter has mentioned about people leaving an organization. So can an organization say, well, no, it's because of all of the other factors that, you know, every company is seeing, and less about whether my workplace is psychologically safe?
I don't buy that. I mean, there are other factors why people leave, but actually, I mean, this comes back to another core, you know, and it's, if this is a core foundation for organizations to get right, and you know, Joelle and Pete have described really great indicators for working out what, you know, for understanding whether your organization has an issue. What I would also say is, you know, if leaders don't know that they have an issue within their organization, that should be a really huge red flag, you know, and they need to be talking to their people. They need to be understanding what that culture is within their organization. And they are in a, you know, they hire the people, you know, from a boardroom perspective, they need to be asking these questions. You know, I dealt with a situation, because I deal with lots of different companies. I dealt with a situation where I didn't have something that I needed, and I spoke to somebody on the telephone, and they came across terrified to me, saying, I'm so sorry that I didn't get it. And you could hear the terror in this person's voice, because that I hadn't had something that I needed, you know, at that point. And it was like, do you know what, this is fine, you know. It's like, if nobody has, you know, nobody's hurt themselves, it's okay, we will move around it and get around it. And it's, you can feel that within an organization. I think it's part of our roles to develop that empathy. And if we're feeling, you know, it comes back to putting heart into health and safety. If you feel that something isn't right, is follow that instinct. I've always, you know, I've always followed my instincts in respect of this. And I think for organisations, it has to be a core value, and there can be other factors at play, but whether somebody feels psychologically safe at work matters, and it's a core foundation.
And I guess even if you think you are at a good level, there's continuous improvement as, you know, people change out. We have different people coming into the workforce, etc. I've just realized the time, and wow, time has flown by. So I'm going to jump to Karen had asked a question, and it ties into one of the questions I have here, because I want to get back to 45,003 and implementation. So Karen asks if anyone knows if there's been recent research done within workplaces of interventions that have been put in place to improve individuals' psychological safety. So thanks, Karen, for that question. So I guess maybe I'll tie to my question I had about what are some of the key elements for successful implementation of 45,003. We touched a bit on it, but I wanted Joelle to expand a bit more around some of the tools that's available. And if you can maybe link it to Karen's question as well, if it can be linked.
Yeah, they're two separate things.
Oh, is it? Okay.
That's okay. So, I mean, in terms of research, unfortunately, the majority of research at the moment is very much focused on individual level interventions. So, you know, let's look at mindfulness or resilience training or those types of things. Even, you know, mental health first aid, or, you know, all of these types of interventions that are really aimed at helping an individual cope with the stresses in the workplace. There hasn't been a lot of good quality research done on the preventative, the work design type of approaches. That's changing. So in the episode coming up on Tuesday, actually, we've interviewed Dr. Carol Hon, and she's talking about the research that she's been doing in the Australian construction industry. Jason and I really nerded out in this one. So it's, if that's your thing or not, I don't know, but we were very excited about the research that she's been doing, what she's found so far, and the next steps are going to be actually evaluating those work design type of approaches. So I guess that research is coming. The important thing, though, I would say, is that to reflect on what Peter said, the most important thing you can do is consult with the people who are affected, and most of the time they're going to be able to give you a pretty good idea of what the best actions are going to be, and they're going to be different for each situation because the drivers that are actually triggering those hazards to emerge are going to be different. You know, overwork, is it because we don't have enough people? Is it because the software systems that we have to use keep crashing and we have to keep repeating the work that we're doing? You know, the cause of that overwork is going to be different for every organisation and every team, as an example. So you really need to consult with the workforce to understand the problem. Thank you, Pete. In terms of tools, I guess we've got a free mental health benchmark tool that we've just launched. So this is for companies 200 people or more, and it's using, it's mapped against Tony LaMontagne's integrated model. So looking at promote flourishing, prevent harm, and mitigate or respond to ill health. So this is a free opportunity for organisations to come in and actually look at, develop a baseline of their existing management systems, compare that against the global benchmark that we'll be establishing, and actually start to map out a process of here are the gaps in our systems. The other thing that I will just quickly mention is that we are launching our first Catalyst program cohort in the UK. That will be commencing in March. of next year. And that's we'll take a group of probably 12 organisations through a really structured implementation of getting themselves ready to do psych health and safety properly, embedding it in their systems of work, taking them through a train the trainer approach to upskill their internal functions, and then doing the first iteration of the risk management cycle. So if people are interested in hearing more about that, LinkedIn is the best way to get in touch with me. And we are pretty close to hiring a couple of people in the UK to be able to run that program locally, which is very exciting for us. So I'll pop the mentalhealthbenchmark.com. So if people want to check that out, they can do. And yeah, otherwise I'm on LinkedIn and get hold of me there.
Excellent.
Thanks so much for that. Sorry for that little bit of excitement there, Joelle. So,
that's fine.
This is exactly in 5.1 in the standard plan. I'm going to read it out to you. Leadership and commitment is 5.1, and it says empower workers and ensure they are competent to fulfill their roles and responsibilities to identify psychosocial risk management, remove barriers that can limit workers' participation, and aim to enhance participation. Actively engage workers in continual dialogue on the management of psychosocial risk. So it's a relationship between the leaders and the staff. And then when you move into the consultation element of working, consultation participation with workers, it's embedded. And yeah, sorry, I was fully on with what you were saying, but that's because it sits fully in the standard. And so things we're talking about are things that are embedded in the as good examples of what you can do. So yeah, and if you're earning, I think if you're earning less than 25 million profit, you're able to obtain this as a PDF, so you don't have to buy the standard. But it'd be good if you could buy the standard, obviously. Sorry.
No, thanks. Peter, can you post, if possible, the link to the standard in the chat?
I can, if this is the paper copy, but I can send it to you. You can send it out.
Okay, yeah, we'll do. Yeah. So thanks,
Joe. Fill out a little form to say you're small. Yeah, so I'll do it for you.
No, good, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Joelle, for I was trying to be efficient, tying into two questions because I immediately thought interventions would be the 45,003. So Karen's posted she's doing her master's in occupational and organizational psychology, focusing on leadership styles. So I've had so many ideas from the session. So no, that's a good feedback as we come to the, near to the end.
Can I just quickly, can I just pick up a couple of things? There's a couple of things that I want to just say about this as a standard. So again, implementing ISO standards within organizations does not necessarily, it's not about a tick box exercise, and implementing ISOs may not be the right approach for some organizations in respect of how they raise their standards. But what I would say about 45,003 is that it has been really well thought through, and there's something in here that is going to enable organizations to actually create those foundation blocks that I've talked about, that initial piece. And Joelle mentioned organizational design, and if we translate this into what we do in respect of health and safety, we can eliminate risk by really good design. And we know that from physical health and safety, particularly in the construction industry. I'm a big fan of CDM, and this is no different. So we need to start by looking at how our organizations are designed, which kind of plays into governance, which I've been talking about quite a lot as well. And that has to be the foundation piece. And that's where this standard is brilliant, because this will help organizations to create and understand what they need to do from an organizational design perspective. And I think that's absolutely the place to start. If we start with, we've talked about this a lot, you can't start with just introducing health, mental health first aiders to organisations, it has to be looked at much more holistically.
No, thanks. And Louise, I think that's a great way to close as we're at the top of the hour. So thank you for summarizing that.
We could actually keep talking all day.
We could, but I do have a meeting and I'm sure everybody else do as well. So I just want to say thanks very much to Joelle, Peter, and Louise for, very informative, insightful conversations. Love the sharing of the information. Thank you, Joelle, for putting those links in the chat. I know the OneWISH team knows this of me. I'm a podcast junkie. There's only about 8 that I actively listen to. And 2 of them are the Psych Health and Safety podcast, the Australia one, which I don't want to go into much about LinkedIn and how much I like the information I get from it. But I found out about it through David Provan connection, etc. And that's how I found out about the Australia one. And then from there, the UK one, and now there's a USA one, etc., where we connected with Dr. Daniels. So anyway, so I highly recommend the podcast. They are great. And I also like that, sometimes there is like cross linkages with different podcasts, etc. So Joelle, I know Jason is in here. You all are doing an amazing job. Peter and I've forgotten her name now. Sorry. You're muted. Sheila, thank you, Sheila Lord. Thank you. Doing a great job as well. So I highly recommend those podcasts. And so Louise, we need yours.
I just go on everybody else's podcast.
I know. Thanks very much, everyone. I hope listeners who joined us.
Tune in for the other sessions, the other OneWISH sessions, because we've got Heather Beach tomorrow.
Yes, thanks, Louise. So with that, just want to remind.
She's a crack at Heather Beach.
Yeah.
I was trying to find the link. I couldn't find it in time, but I will give you the link for the stand so you can. Yeah. Yeah,
thanks. So as Louise has touched on, we have day 4 of our sessions tomorrow, where we will be having Heather Beach at 1 p.m. UK time, who will be speaking on managing stress and burnout in an uncertain world. So very connected to the conversations we've had today. But earlier in the morning at 10 a.m., we'll be having a great panel discussion about where mentoring fits in improving health and well-being. And that will be led by Karen McDonald and Anne Demet. And they will be having several other ladies joining them in that discussion. So do join us and do follow us again on all our social media pieces. And if you haven't seen or you weren't live at the events earlier this week, the recordings are available. Very useful information. So keep well. Thanks, Joelle, from calling in from Australia.
Bye.
Hope to see you sometime soon. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Louise.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.